So let's now make the cart work, and let's make sure we can add and delete items from there as well. Now actually we can start with adding items because we got all the logic for that in place already. And in the cart.js file, we got the cart item handler, which is being triggered when this plus button for a cart item is clicked. So in the cart item handler, we now simply need to reach out to our cart context and call add item there and simply forward the item. And that will trigger that add item function in the cart provider. Here it is, which dispatches this cart action, and that will therefore already do the rest. So with that, if we save that, if we reload, if I add a couple of items, if I click the plus next to sushi, this already updates, and the same for the schnitzel. So this is working. Now what's of course not working is removing items. So therefore, let's work on this now. We already got the remove item from cart handler in the cart provider, where we dispatch an action, but currently we're not really handling that action. In the cart reducer, we should now add another if check, where we check if the action type is equal to remove. Like this. And actually we should do that not here, but next to the add if check. So here, right before we return our default cart state, which is our fallback in case we had some other action. Now in here, we now want to update the cart. And again, we'll have to make a differentiation here. Generally, we want to update the existing cart item. So for example, here, if we already have sushi in the cart and we click minus, we want to decrease the amount by 1. But sushi will still be a cart item unless we had an amount of 1 here. Then, if I press minus again, if this was 1 here, I want to remove the item entirely from the cart. So we'll have to differentiate and check for that here in our reducer. We can start by finding the cart item as a first step though. For this, I'll again get my existing cart item index here by reaching out to state items find index. Same logic as before. And here, just as before, we can copy that entire code here and replace this actually. We now find the index of an existing item. Now we can also get the item itself by then reaching out to state items for that identified index here. We also want to update the amount, and we can do that first. The updated total amount is simply state item, state total amount minus simply existing item dot price, and I should move this past the existing item, of course. Because either way, if we remove the item entirely from the array, or if we just decrease the amount in the cart, we simply remove one item of that type. So the total amount definitely decreases by the price of one single removed item. So this line here is always correct. Now we can again create our updated items variable and then again differentiate. And simply check if for the existing item the amount is equal to 1, which means it's the last item of that type in the cart which we want to remove, in which case we want to remove the entire item from the array. Else, if it's bigger than 1, we want to keep the item in the array, we want to keep the item in the cart, but we want to decrease the amount. So let's start with the if case. Here, updated items is simply state items filter. Filter is a built-in method which returns a new array filtered by applying specific conditions. And we pass a function to filter which is executed for every item in the array. And that function receives the item. And if we return true here, we keep the item in the newly returned array. If we return false, we get rid of it. So here we want to keep all items, but we want to remove the item with that ID which we get on our action here. That's the item we want to get rid of. And by the way, here we should just check action ID, not action item ID, because for removing items, we are dispatching an object which just has the ID, not the entire item. So that's a little fix we should implement anyways. But now back to filter. Here we want to check if item ID is not equal to action.id. With this check, we make sure that all items where the ID is not equal to the action ID are kept, because this returns true and hence the items are kept. But the one item where the item ID is equal to the ID of the action, which is the to be removed ID, for that one item, we return false here, and then we remove that item from the newly generated array. So that gives us a new array where this item with this ID is not part anymore. And that's the entire logic for this case that we had an amount of 1. Now, if the amount is greater than 1, we don't want to remove the item from the array. We just want to update the amount. So here we have the updated item, which is a copy of the existing item in a new object with the spread operator. And we just update the amount. We set the amount to existing item.amount minus 1 to decrease it by 1. And updated items is then a copy of state items to create a new array with the old items. But we override one of these items, the item for that index which we got here, where we then override the old item in the array with the updated item, which has the updated amount. And then here, after this if-else block, we simply return a new state object where items is updated items and the total amount is equal to the updated total amount. And that's our logic for removing items from the cart. Now we just need to wire up this button in the cart component. Here in the cart item remove handler, we now want to call cart context remove item and forward that ID. And if we do that and save everything, if I reload and I add a couple of items, I have one of all these items in there. If I now remove sushi, it's removed entirely from the array. If I add one to the schnitzel and I then remove that, the amount is just decreased, and only if I remove that again, it's removed from the cart. So now it looks like adding and removing to and from the cart is working correctly. And that's exactly, of course, what we want here. Now with that, we're almost done, but I want to play a little animation on the cart button now whenever a new item is added to highlight that this badge changed and that the cart overall changed.